Royal Guard OPENED Camilla's hidden safe, and found the late Queen's stolen jewels inside. The halls, usually bustling with staff and aides, were unusually still. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers, a subtle reminder of the meticulous care taken every day to maintain the grandeur of the royal residence. Thomas Henderson, a senior royal guard, walked through these familiar corridors with his usual sense of duty and attention to detail. He had served the royal family for nearly a decade, and in that time he had witnessed many events, both public and private. Yet nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he would discover that day. Thomas had been assigned a routine inspection of the private chambers of Camilla, the queen consort. Her rooms were always elegantly decorated, a reflection of her refined taste. Antique furniture, delicate porcelain vases, and carefully arranged floral arrangements filled the space. Everything was in perfect order, and Thomas had grown accustomed to noticing the subtle details that made her quarters unique. On this particular morning, as he walked past an old painting near the far wall of her study, something caught his eye. It was not immediately obvious. At first glance, it appeared to be just another beautiful painting of a countryside landscape. But Thomas, trained to notice even the slightest irregularities, saw a faint outline around the frame. It was subtle, almost invisible, but enough to make him pause. His instincts told him that there was more than met the eye. Royal protocol allowed him to investigate suspicious findings, and this seemed like one of those rare moments where caution had to be paired with curiosity. He carefully moved closer, examining the wall behind the painting. To the trained eye, the edges of the wall panel did not align perfectly with the rest of the room. It was a small detail, but one that suggested the presence of a hidden compartment. Thomas's heart began to race, not out of fear but anticipation. He had discovered secret spaces in the palace before, but never anything of significant consequence. This time felt different. With meticulous care, he removed the painting and examined the wall behind it. There it was, a small, concealed safe, hidden so skillfully that it had gone unnoticed for years. The craftsmanship was remarkable, blending seamlessly with the surrounding woodwork. It was not the size of the safe that impressed Thomas, but the implication of its existence. Hidden safes were not unusual in royal estates, but their contents often remained a mystery. He knew the importance of handling the situation with discretion. A royal safe could hold documents, valuables, or secrets, any of which could have significant consequences if revealed prematurely. Thomas retrieved the official key from his security belt, a key assigned specifically for emergencies and sensitive inspections. His hands were steady, but his mind raced with questions. What could be inside? Who had placed it there and why? The anticipation was almost unbearable. He turned the key slowly, the soft click echoing in the otherwise silent room. With a careful push, the safe door opened, revealing a sight that made him pause in disbelief. Inside lay an assortment of jewels, glittering under the soft morning light. Necklaces, rings, and brooches sparkled with unmatched brilliance. There were emeralds, diamonds, sapphires, and rubies, each piece more stunning than the last. Thomas's eyes widened as he recognized some of the pieces. These were not ordinary jewels. They belonged to the late queen herself, reported missing from the royal collection months earlier. The news of the missing jewels had caused a quiet stir within the palace, though the public had only been made aware of it indirectly through media reports. To see them here in this hidden safe was both shocking and surreal. Thomas took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew the gravity of the situation. This was not simply about lost treasures. It was about trust, secrecy, and the integrity of the royal household. The jewels represented not just wealth, but a legacy, a symbol of history carefully preserved over decades. For someone to have hidden them in Camilla's private chambers raised countless questions. How had they ended up here? Who had access to her rooms? And most importantly, was Camilla aware of their presence? He carefully examined the contents, noting each piece, its size, and its apparent condition. The jewels were meticulously arranged, almost as if someone had taken great care to display them neatly within the safe. This suggested planning, not haphazard placement. The more Thomas looked, the more he realized that this was not a random act. Someone had deliberately chosen this location, possibly believing it to be the last place anyone would think to look. The discovery left Thomas in a state of cautious excitement. He understood that what he had found could have far-reaching implications, not just for the royal family, but for the palace staff and the public perception of the monarchy. As he stepped back from the safe, Thomas's mind wandered to the implications of his discovery. He had spent years serving the royal family, and he prided himself on his loyalty and discretion. Yet, nothing in his training had prepared him for a situation like this. He knew that reporting the discovery would trigger a careful, deliberate investigation, involving private detectives, legal advisors, and senior members of the palace staff. The jewels were priceless, but the story surrounding them could be even more valuable and potentially explosive. He also thought about Camilla. She had always presented herself as composed, elegant, and above the petty intrigues that often surrounded royal life. Could she truly have been unaware of the safe? Or was it possible that she had deliberately kept the jewels hidden? Thomas knew better than to jump to conclusions. His role was to report, not to judge. The investigation would reveal the truth, but until then, he had to maintain professionalism and secrecy. After ensuring that the safe was secured and nothing else appeared out of place in the room, Thomas carefully replaced the painting, concealing the safe once more. Everything looked as it had before, giving no hint of the extraordinary discovery he had just made. He made detailed notes for the official report, documenting every step of his observation without revealing his personal thoughts or suspicions. This was a critical step, as the report would serve as the foundation for the investigation and could later be used as evidence if required. Throughout the morning, Thomas maintained his usual duties, all the while carrying the secret of the safe in his mind. The palace continued its routine, unaware of the discovery that had just taken place. Staff went about their tasks, courtiers discussed upcoming events, and Camilla herself moved through her chambers with the familiar grace that had become her hallmark. Yet for Thomas, nothing would ever be quite the same. He had glimpsed a hidden world within the palace, one where trust, secrecy, and history intersected in ways few could imagine. By the time the investigation team was discreetly informed, the palace had already begun taking preliminary steps to ensure that the discovery remained confidential. Security protocols were tightened, and access to Camilla's chambers was temporarily restricted. Experts were called in to verify the jewels and document them accurately. Thomas, despite the growing tension, felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had done his duty, and in doing so, had uncovered a secret that would shape the coming weeks in ways no one could yet predict. The discovery of the hidden safe would soon become the starting point of a story filled with intrigue, investigation, and revelation. It was a story that would test loyalties, challenge assumptions, and ultimately reveal the delicate balance of trust within the royal household. For Thomas Henderson, the quiet morning had transformed into an extraordinary turning point, marking the beginning of a chapter that would be remembered in palace history for years to come. As he left Camilla's chambers that day, Thomas could not help but glance back at the painting, now concealing the safe once more. He knew that behind that unassuming wall lay more than just jewels. It held secrets, questions, and a story waiting to unfold. And he, a loyal royal guard, had become its first witness. The discovery of the hidden safe in Camilla's chambers sent ripples through the palace, though outwardly, everything remained calm. Behind closed doors, however, the royal household was in a state of quiet urgency. The jewels belonged to the late queen, and their sudden reappearance in such an unexpected place raised questions that demanded immediate answers. For Thomas Henderson, the senior royal guard who had uncovered the safe, the next few days would be filled with both responsibility and tension. He knew that handling this situation required patience, discretion, and careful observation. The palace administration, realizing the sensitivity of the matter, convened a small, discreet committee. Private investigators were brought in to verify the authenticity of the jewels and trace their movements. Legal advisors were consulted to ensure that all actions would comply with royal protocols and national laws. Every precaution was taken to prevent the news from leaking to the public before the investigation was complete. This was vital. The monarchy's reputation had to be preserved, and any hint of scandal could have lasting consequences. The first step in the investigation was to verify the jewels themselves. A team of experts, including gemologists and historians, carefully examined each piece. They compared the jewels to records maintained in the royal archives. Every brooch, necklace, and ring was meticulously documented, photographed, and catalogued. It did not take long for them to confirm what Thomas had already feared. The jewels were indeed those reported missing from the late Queen's collection. Their value, both monetary and historical, was immense. Some pieces had been passed down through generations, carrying with them stories of past monarchs and important state occasions. The fact that such treasures had been hidden in a private safe added a layer of intrigue that no one had anticipated. As the investigation continued, the focus shifted to understanding how the jewels had ended up in Camilla's chambers. Staff members who had access to the private areas were questioned discreetly. Everyone from housekeepers to aides and security personnel was asked to recall any unusual activities, but no one could provide a clear answer. The palace had always prided itself on strict security protocols, making the unexplained appearance of the jewels even more puzzling. The investigators began to consider every possibility, including whether someone had taken advantage of gaps in the palace's routines or had gained access through clever planning. Meanwhile, Thomas continued his daily duties as a royal guard, walking the same halls he had patrolled countless times before, now with a heightened sense of awareness. Every detail, no matter how small, seemed significant. The placement of a chair, the alignment of a curtain, or the pattern of footsteps in the corridor could potentially hold clues. He became more attentive than ever, observing both the staff and visitors with a careful, measured gaze. Though it was a challenging balance to maintain normalcy while monitoring a potential scandal, Thomas understood the importance of remaining composed. Panic or suspicion could have easily disrupted the investigation. At the same time, Camilla herself became aware that something unusual was happening, though the palace managed to handle it delicately. She was informed that a review of the royal collection had uncovered the missing jewels and that their presence in her chambers was being investigated. Camilla, always composed and dignified, expressed surprise and concern. She insisted that she had no knowledge of the jewels being hidden in her private rooms and welcomed the investigation, emphasizing that she had nothing to hide. Her calm demeanor helped maintain stability within the palace, but internally, many questioned whether her reaction was genuine. As the investigation deepened, the team began to uncover subtle clues. Handwritten notes were found among the palace documents, some of which referenced moving or storing valuable items temporarily. Security camera footage, reviewed carefully, showed unusual activity around Camilla's chambers over the months before the discovery. Certain staff members had been in areas where they normally would not have needed access. These small details painted a picture of careful planning, suggesting that someone had deliberately hidden the jewels in a place thought to be beyond suspicion. The evidence, while circumstantial, began to point toward the idea that the safe had been used without Camilla's full knowledge. The palace faced a delicate dilemma. On one hand, they needed to uncover the truth quickly and restore security. On the other hand, they had to handle the situation with extreme discretion to protect reputations and prevent public scandal. The royal family's image was paramount, and any suggestion of wrongdoing, even if ultimately disproven, could lead to widespread criticism. As a result, the investigation was conducted quietly, with only a select few individuals aware of the full scope of the situation. Thomas, in his role as the initial discoverer, was kept informed, but was instructed to avoid sharing any details outside of the official investigation channels. Public speculation, though initially limited, began to grow. Rumors circulated quietly among journalists and palace watchers. While no official statement had been made, the mere idea of missing royal jewels sparked interest and intrigue. People wondered how such valuable items could vanish and what their sudden reappearance might mean. The palace press office worked diligently to manage any leaks, issuing only carefully worded statements about ongoing reviews of the royal collection, without revealing the specific circumstances surrounding the discovery in Camilla's chambers. For Thomas, the days were a mixture of anticipation and tension. Each morning, he reported to his duties, walking the corridors with a quiet awareness of the hidden safe and its contents. He understood that the smallest detail could prove critical, and he made a point of noting everything unusual, from minor changes in staff behavior to unusual delivery schedules. It was a test of both vigilance and patience, requiring him to balance his routine responsibilities with the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the discovery. Meanwhile, the palace investigators began to develop a timeline. By cross-referencing staff schedules, security logs, and other documentation, they attempted to determine when the jewels had been moved and by whom. They identified gaps in routine checks that could have allowed someone to act unnoticed. The palace had always prided itself on precision and order, but even in such a controlled environment, human error and clever planning had created opportunities for secrecy. It became clear that this was not a random act, but a carefully orchestrated plan designed to exploit the trust and routines within the household. The story of the hidden jewels quickly became a matter of intrigue even within the palace itself. Conversations were measured, cautious, and deliberate. Staff speculated quietly among themselves while trying to maintain professionalism. The discovery had exposed vulnerabilities in the palace's security protocols, and everyone felt a heightened sense of responsibility. Even minor oversights could now seem significant, and the atmosphere was filled with a subtle tension, as if everyone were walking on invisible eggshells. As the investigation progressed, more details about the jewels themselves came to light. Many of the pieces had been specially commissioned for state occasions and were renowned for their craftsmanship and historical significance. Some had been worn by previous monarchs during important ceremonies, making them irreplaceable cultural treasures. The fact that they had been hidden in a private safe added to the intrigue, highlighting how objects of such value could quietly disappear and resurface in unexpected places. It was a reminder that history and personal legacy could be intertwined with secrecy and trust in ways few outside the palace could imagine. Thomas, reflecting on his role in the unfolding events, understood the gravity of what he had uncovered. He had stumbled upon a secret that had remained hidden for months, perhaps longer. His diligence and attention to detail had made him the first person to witness this extraordinary discovery. While he remained cautious and measured, there was a quiet sense of pride in knowing that his actions had initiated the investigation. He had uncovered not just missing jewels, but a story that would test loyalty, trust, and integrity within the royal household. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation continued meticulously. The palace maintained strict discretion, ensuring that the process was thorough and fair. Every lead was examined, every clue analyzed, and every staff member treated with respect, even as the mystery deepened. Thomas remained vigilant, aware that his role extended beyond simple security. It was about safeguarding history, tradition, and the reputation of the monarchy. The discovery of the jewels in Camilla's chambers became more than a simple security matter. It evolved into a story of human behavior, trust, and the subtle complexities of life within the royal household. It was a reminder that even in a world of elegance, discipline, and routine, secrets could be hidden just out of sight, waiting for the right person to uncover them. Thomas had become that person, and his quiet courage set the stage for the revelations that were yet to come. By the end of the investigation phase, a clearer picture began to emerge, though many questions remained. Who had orchestrated the placement of the jewels? Had Camilla been unaware, or was there more to her involvement than she admitted? These questions lingered in the minds of both investigators and staff alike. Yet, throughout it all, the palace maintained its poise, balancing the demands of security, discretion, and historical preservation. For Thomas, it was a time of vigilance, careful observation, and reflection on the unexpected ways in which ordinary days could transform into extraordinary moments of discovery. The hidden jewels, once thought lost, had resurfaced, sparking a complex investigation that tested every principle of trust and security within the royal household. For those involved, including Thomas, it was a lesson in patience, diligence, and the careful navigation of intrigue within one of the most storied households in the world. The story was far from over, and the coming days promised even more revelations, confrontations, and a deeper understanding of the delicate balance that underpinned life within the palace. The days following the discovery of the hidden safe in Camilla's chambers were filled with quiet tension throughout the palace. Though outwardly life appeared calm and normal, behind the scenes, a storm of investigation, speculation, and careful planning was underway. Every step had to be deliberate, every conversation measured, because the jewels inside the safe were more than just valuable objects. They were a symbol of history, tradition, and the legacy of the late queen. The palace could not afford mistakes, and those involved in the investigation understood the importance of discretion. Thomas Henderson, the senior royal guard who had first discovered the safe, continued his daily routines while keeping a watchful eye on the unfolding events. He had always been known for his diligence, but now his attentiveness had a new urgency. Every footstep in the corridors, every subtle change in behavior among the staff, and every delivery to the chambers of Camilla was noted carefully. The palace relied on him not only for security, but for insight into the human patterns that could reveal important clues. Thomas understood that the mystery surrounding the jewels was not just about theft. It was about trust, secrecy, and human motivations within one of the world's most high-profile households. Meanwhile, the investigation team began to piece together a clearer timeline. The team included private detectives, legal advisors, and experts in palace security. They cross-referenced staff schedules, examined security logs, and reviewed footage from discrete cameras placed in hallways and entrances. They found that some staff members had been in unusual places at odd times, suggesting that someone had taken advantage of gaps in the regular security checks. Handwritten notes discovered among Camilla's papers hinted at the movement of valuable items, though none directly implicated her. These small pieces of evidence slowly began to form a picture, suggesting that the jewels had been deliberately hidden, possibly without Camilla's knowledge. The palace had to approach the situation carefully. Camilla, as queen consort, held a position of immense importance and influence. Any hint of wrongdoing on her part could create a scandal of unimaginable proportions. To maintain both fairness and discretion, the palace arranged a private meeting with her. It was not an interrogation, but a conversation designed to clarify the facts and gather her perspective. Camilla entered the room with her usual grace and composure, exuding calm even though she must have sensed the gravity of the situation. Her eyes were steady, and her voice measured as she spoke, but the subtle tension in the room was palpable. Thomas observed from a respectful distance, understanding that the responsibility for security and truth lay not just with the investigators but with everyone present. The investigators explained what had been found, showing the catalogued images of the jewels and the safe. They asked Camilla whether she had any knowledge of the items being hidden in her private chambers. Camilla's response was firm and composed. She insisted that she had no knowledge of the jewels' presence, nor had she ever requested anyone to place them there. She appeared genuinely surprised, her expressions and body language reflecting a mixture of concern and confusion. While Camilla maintained her composure, the investigators had to carefully consider the evidence. The safe had been well hidden, and the jewels meticulously arranged inside. This suggested deliberate planning by someone who knew exactly how to avoid detection. Footage and notes indicated that staff members had been in positions that could allow access to Camilla's chambers, raising the possibility that someone else had orchestrated the placement of the jewels without her awareness. The palace had to balance the need for justice with the need to protect the reputation of individuals who may have been innocent. In the days following the meeting, Thomas continued his observations with even greater attention. He noticed subtle changes in staff behavior. Some seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact or speaking in hushed tones. Others appeared unusually meticulous in their routines, perhaps to avoid drawing suspicion. Thomas documented everything, understanding that these small behavioral clues could prove as important as physical evidence. The investigation was no longer just about the jewels. It had become a study of human nature, loyalty, and the complex dynamics within the palace. The palace also began reviewing historical records related to the missing jewels. Each piece had a story, often tied to significant events in royal history. Some had been worn during coronations, state visits, or ceremonial occasions. Their disappearance had been a matter of quiet concern for months, though the public had only known fragments of the story. Now, the revelation that they had been hidden in Camilla's chambers added a dramatic twist. The palace historians and advisors emphasized the importance of preserving not only the physical items, but the integrity of the royal narrative. As investigators delved deeper, they began to uncover subtle but telling details. The safe had been placed behind an antique painting, a location rarely disturbed. Its design suggested that it had been installed long ago, likely with careful knowledge of palace routines. Handwritten notes, partially obscured and difficult to interpret, referenced moving valuable items to a secure place for temporary safekeeping. Though these notes did not directly implicate Camilla, they indicated the careful planning required to hide the jewels. The pattern suggested that someone with intimate knowledge of the palace and its daily operations had orchestrated the events. Public interest, though largely speculative at this point, added another layer of complexity. Rumors began to circulate quietly among journalists and royal watchers, fueled by curiosity about the missing jewels and the mysterious circumstances of their reappearance. The palace press office managed communications carefully, issuing measured statements about ongoing reviews of the royal collection, but without revealing specific details. The goal was to prevent misinformation while preserving public confidence in the monarchy. For Thomas and the investigation team, this meant extra caution. Any slip could lead to leaks, further complicating the situation. The investigation also required a careful examination of staff relationships and movements. Everyone from housekeepers to personal aides was questioned discreetly. Investigators asked about schedules, unusual deliveries, or unexplained absences. Some staff members appeared cooperative but cautious, while others seemed nervous, perhaps aware of details they were hesitant to share. These conversations, though slow and methodical, began to reveal patterns that pointed toward deliberate manipulation of palace routines. Someone had taken advantage of trust, timing, and the assumption that Camilla's chambers were private and secure. Camilla herself faced a difficult balance. She had to maintain her dignity and authority while cooperating fully with the investigation. For someone in her position, every word, gesture, and reaction was scrutinized, both internally and externally. The palace advisors provided guidance, ensuring that her responses were consistent and factual. She emphasized her lack of knowledge regarding the hidden jewels, expressing genuine concern about the breach of trust that had allowed such an event to occur. Her composed demeanor helped maintain stability within the palace, even as investigators worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. As days turned into weeks, a clearer understanding began to emerge. The evidence suggested that someone with access to Camilla's chambers had intentionally hidden the jewels, knowing the location would likely remain undisturbed. The palace team concluded that Camilla herself was unlikely to have placed the jewels in the safe, but the mystery of who had orchestrated the plan remained unsolved. Investigators focused on tracing the movements and actions of individuals who had been in positions to carry out such a scheme. Each clue brought them closer to understanding the motivations, methods, and timing behind the hidden jewels. Thomas, meanwhile, reflected on the extraordinary nature of his discovery. His routine duties as a royal guard had unexpectedly placed him at the center of a high-stakes mystery involving priceless historical artifacts. He remained vigilant, noting even the smallest inconsistencies in staff behavior, understanding that these could prove crucial. The investigation had transformed the palace from a familiar environment of order and routine into a complex landscape of secrets, strategies, and subtle human interactions. Every corridor, chamber, and interaction seemed laden with meaning, and Thomas's attention to detail became more important than ever. The palace continued to manage the situation with care, balancing justice, discretion, and historical preservation. Security measures were enhanced. Access to private areas was carefully monitored, and investigators continued to analyze evidence. The hidden jewels, while physically secure, had sparked a larger narrative about trust, human behavior, and the delicate balance of authority within the royal household. Each discovery, each observation, and each careful conversation added another layer to the unfolding story. For Thomas, the investigation also brought personal reflection. He realized that loyalty and diligence could reveal truths that might otherwise remain hidden. His role as a guard had evolved beyond protection to encompass observation, insight, and careful judgment. The hidden safe had become a symbol not only of the missing jewels, but of the unseen intricacies that defined life within the palace. Every detail mattered, and every action could influence the outcome of the investigation. By the end of this phase, the palace had achieved several critical milestones. They had confirmed the authenticity of the jewels, documented their placement and condition, and gathered substantial evidence regarding the circumstances of their concealment. While the exact identity of the individual responsible remained a mystery, patterns of behavior and subtle clues indicated careful planning and strategic execution. Camilla's cooperation, composure, and transparency helped maintain stability and credibility throughout the process. The story of the hidden jewels had moved from simple discovery to intricate investigation, raising questions about loyalty, trust, and the human capacity for secrecy. For Thomas and the palace team, it was a test of patience, diligence, and observation. The next phase, however, promised even greater challenges as they prepared to confront the realities uncovered by the investigation and address the implications for everyone involved. In this tense atmosphere, the palace continued to function with its usual poise and elegance, but behind the scenes, lives were forever changed by the discovery of a hidden safe and the treasures it contained. For Thomas Henderson, the senior royal guard, the extraordinary circumstances had transformed his daily routines into a story of courage, discretion, and unwavering attention to detail. He had become a witness to events that would be remembered for generations, understanding that in the world of royalty, even the smallest discoveries could have profound consequences. The weeks following the discovery of the hidden safe had been tense and filled with uncertainty. The palace, which normally thrived on order and routine, had been quietly transformed into a place of investigation, reflection, and anticipation. Everyone involved, staff, investigators, and security personnel, understood that the events surrounding the stolen jewels would leave a lasting mark on the history of the royal household. For Thomas Henderson, the senior royal guard who had first uncovered the safe, this final phase was both the most challenging and the most rewarding. The culmination of the investigation promised answers that had eluded everyone for months. By now, investigators had gathered substantial evidence, traced the movements of staff members, and examined the subtle clues surrounding the hidden jewels. The safe had been carefully placed behind an antique painting, its contents meticulously arranged, suggesting deliberate and thoughtful planning. Handwritten notes, partially obscured and difficult to interpret, provided further hints that the jewels had been temporarily moved to a secure location, likely with the intention of avoiding detection. The palace team began to piece together the full story, tracing the steps of the individual or individuals responsible. It soon became clear that the jewels had not been placed in Camilla's safe by her own hand. The evidence pointed to a former staff member, someone who had worked closely within the palace and understood its routines and security measures. This individual had been dismissed months earlier for unrelated reasons, but their knowledge of the estate allowed them to exploit a gap in oversight. The plan had been carefully executed, with the jewels hidden in Camilla's chambers under the assumption that her private rooms would remain undisturbed. The precision and foresight required to carry out such a scheme impressed the investigators, even as it frustrated them. Camilla, upon hearing the findings, expressed relief. Her composure remained intact, though the situation had undoubtedly been stressful. She emphasized that she had never been aware of the jewels' presence and welcomed the conclusion that her chambers had been used without her knowledge. The palace team worked to ensure that her reputation remained untarnished, understanding the importance of preserving public confidence in her role as queen consort. Her cooperation throughout the investigation had been critical in maintaining calm within the royal household. For Thomas Henderson, the revelation brought a sense of closure. He had been the first to discover the safe, and now the puzzle had been solved. His role had gone beyond simple security. He had become a witness to a series of events that involved careful planning, secrecy, and ultimately, justice. The investigation had highlighted the importance of diligence, patience, and observation, qualities that Thomas had demonstrated throughout his service. His meticulous attention to detail had initiated a process that led to the restoration of the stolen treasures and the clarification of the circumstances surrounding their concealment. The palace also took steps to enhance security measures, ensuring that such an incident could not occur again. Access to private chambers was tightened, staff movements were monitored more closely, and protocols for handling valuable items were reviewed and updated. These changes, while practical, also symbolized a broader commitment to trust, transparency, and vigilance. The lessons learned from the hidden safe were not simply about security. They reflected the complex interplay of trust, responsibility, and human behavior within the palace. The stolen jewels, now safely returned to the royal collection, were once again catalogued, displayed, and preserved according to strict protocols. Each piece had a story, often tied to significant events in the monarchy's history. Some had been worn by previous monarchs during coronations or state visits, while others were heirlooms that represented decades of heritage. Their recovery was celebrated quietly within the palace, not as a matter of public spectacle, but as a restoration of history and tradition. The jewels, once thought lost, had regained their place as symbols of continuity, elegance, and royal legacy. Public interest in the story remained high, though the palace managed communications carefully. Official statements highlighted the return of the jewels and the completion of the investigation, without delving into details that could compromise individuals or the dignity of the royal household. The narrative presented was one of diligence, vigilance, and successful resolution, a story that emphasized the careful balance between transparency and discretion. For the public, it was a glimpse into the hidden complexities of palace life, where even small discoveries could have far-reaching consequences. Thomas, reflecting on the events, understood the personal and professional impact of the discovery. He had witnessed firsthand how ordinary routines could intersect with extraordinary circumstances. A hidden safe, a few carefully placed jewels, and the observant eye of a loyal guard had sparked a sequence of events that tested the integrity and resilience of the royal household. For Thomas, it was a reminder that attention to detail, patience, and integrity were qualities that could influence outcomes far beyond what one might expect. The palace staff, too, felt the effects of the investigation. While some had been nervous or uncertain during the process, the resolution brought a renewed sense of confidence and stability. The experience reinforced the importance of trust, accountability, and the careful management of sensitive information. Staff members were reminded that the palace, while a place of tradition and ceremony, also depended on human diligence and ethical behavior to function smoothly. Lessons learned from the hidden jewels would influence training, security protocols, and daily operations for years to come. The individual responsible for hiding the jewels faced legal consequences, though the palace handled the matter discreetly to avoid unnecessary public scandal. The focus remained on restoring the stolen items and ensuring that the circumstances surrounding their concealment were fully understood. Justice had been served, and the integrity of the royal household had been preserved. The case also served as a cautionary tale, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and ethical behavior within even the most privileged and protected environments. Camilla, having emerged from the ordeal with her reputation intact, continued her duties with renewed composure. Her cooperation and transparency during the investigation had reinforced her credibility and trustworthiness, both within the palace and in the eyes of the public. She had demonstrated that even in moments of uncertainty, grace, dignity, and honesty could guide one through challenging circumstances. The experience, while difficult, had ultimately strengthened her position and highlighted her commitment to the monarchy's values and traditions. For Thomas Henderson, the discovery of the safe and the jewels had become more than just an event. It was a defining moment in his career. His careful observations, professionalism, and courage had ensured that the stolen treasures were recovered and that the investigation proceeded smoothly. He had witnessed a story unfold that involved secrecy, trust, and human ingenuity, and he had played a critical role in its resolution. The experience reinforced his understanding of responsibility, vigilance, and the profound impact that even small actions could have in the lives of many. As the palace returned to its usual rhythms, the story of the hidden jewels became part of its quiet legacy. Though not widely publicized in detail, the events were remembered internally as a testament to diligence, loyalty, and the careful management of trust. The recovered jewels, now securely stored and preserved, stood as a symbol of continuity, history, and the careful balance of responsibility within the royal household. They reminded everyone that even in a world of tradition, elegance, and ceremony, vigilance and integrity remained essential. Thomas, walking the familiar corridors once more, reflected on the extraordinary chain of events. The hidden safe, the meticulously arranged jewels, and the careful investigation had transformed ordinary routines into a story of intrigue and resolution. He understood that his role had extended beyond simple security. He had become a witness, an observer, and a participant in a narrative that combined history, secrecy, and human behavior. The lessons he had learned, about trust, patience, and careful observation, would stay with him for the rest of his life. The recovery of the jewels also highlighted the collaborative effort required to maintain order and integrity within the palace. Investigators, staff, legal advisors, and security personnel all played critical roles, demonstrating that even in a world of tradition and ceremony, teamwork and diligence were essential. Each action, from careful observation to meticulous documentation, contributed to the successful resolution of the case. The hidden safe, once a symbol of mystery and uncertainty, had ultimately become a story of justice, restoration, and renewed trust. As the investigation concluded, the palace took steps to ensure that similar incidents could not occur in the future. Security protocols were reviewed and enhanced, staff were trained on new procedures, and monitoring systems were improved. These measures, while practical, also represented a deeper understanding of the importance of vigilance, trust, and responsibility. The story of the hidden jewels had revealed not only the ingenuity of the person who had hidden them, but also the resilience and dedication of those tasked with protecting the royal household. In the end, the jewels were returned to their rightful place. Camilla's reputation remained intact, and Thomas Henderson's diligence had been recognized. The palace had successfully navigated a complex situation that involved secrecy, intrigue, and the delicate balance of trust. The story of the hidden safe and the recovered jewels became part of the quiet, internal history of the royal household, a story that highlighted the importance of careful observation, ethical behavior, and the courage to act when faced with unexpected discoveries. For Thomas, the experience was transformative. He had been the first to notice a subtle detail, the faint outline behind a painting, and that small observation had led to the recovery of priceless jewels, the resolution of a complex mystery, and the preservation of trust within the palace. He had learned that even in a world defined by tradition and ceremony, the actions of one vigilant individual could have profound and far-reaching consequences. As the palace resumed its normal routines, the hidden jewels stood quietly in their place, a symbol of history, legacy, and the careful balance of trust. The story had begun with a simple act of observation, evolved through investigation and human intrigue, and concluded with justice and restoration. For Thomas Henderson and those involved, it was a reminder that attention to detail, integrity, and patience could shape outcomes in ways that were both meaningful and lasting. The royal household, though forever changed by the events surrounding the hidden jewels, emerged with its values intact, its history preserved, and its vigilance strengthened. The recovered treasures symbolized more than wealth. They represented the triumph of diligence, transparency, and ethical responsibility. And for Thomas Henderson, the quiet, watchful guard who had first discovered the safe, the story would remain a defining chapter in his life, a story of discovery, investigation, and the careful preservation of history.